This is a production of kmmedia.pro. Welcome back to Positive Talk Radio. Our goal is simple: to explore evolving ideas one conversation at a time. So come on over into our world. I know you'll like it, because on today's show, we get to feature a young lady that is from New York City or thereabouts, and she is a lecturer and a producer. She's a writer, and she also does. She's a cognitive behavioral therapist. I wish I could talk. I haven't talked very much today. I'm sorry. In any event, she's here. But first, I got to talk to my friend Eric. How are you?
Hey, good afternoon, Kevin. I'm doing fine. Happy Monday.
Happy
Hope you had a
Monday
good
to
weekend.
you. I did. I had a very nice weekend. By the way, I got to ask you, when you read literature, what kind of literature are you drawn to? Is it Shakespeare? Is it horror? What is your genre? Do you have one?
I'll be honest, I mostly read rock and roll autobiographies or biographies. I don't dip that much into literature, but I have enjoyed some of the classics over the years, of course. I'm a big Sherlock Holmes fan, for instance, so I've enjoyed all those original stories. And Oscar Wilde stuff is always good in my book, and his book. But
Exactly. Exactly.
but
Well,
yeah, those are some of my faves. How about you?
I end up reading a lot of positive, I really hesitate to even say this because the show is called Positive Talk Radio. And if I read a lot of positive motivational stuff and that kind of thing, rather than which I really am supposed to do since I have a show called, Positive, Talk Radio. So
Sure.
that's what I do. I don't generally get into a lot of romance or I'll tell you what though. When I was younger, Louis L'Amour was one of my favorite writers.
My grandpa as well. He loved Louis L'Amour stuff. All
Yeah,
like cowboy fiction, basically.
exactly. Cowboy
Yeah.
fiction and John Wayne played several of his characters in the movies and stuff like that. So that was a lot of fun. Well, we've got an author today, and she's got an unusual genre that we're going to talk about a little bit, and also all the things that she has done in her life and continues to do today. So her name is Moshaty, and she's joining us from New York City. I understand the weather is not good there.
It's not great. It's not great. It's not great. That's why I was like, is my lighting okay? Because it's pretty desolate outside. It's very post-apocalyptic today. But
What's
we're
it
doing
doing?
okay. It's we were in a severe thunderstorm. First it was a watch, and then it was a warning, and then it was like, please don't leave your house. So I'm cozy inside. We're doing good.
Well, that's good. Now, I haven't been to New York. Is New York one of those places that, like, I've been in, like, Arkansas, which is Tornado Alley, and
Mm-hmm.
Oklahoma, and they when you're watching TV in the bottom corner of the screen, they'll have the different counties in your
Yep.
area.
Yep.
Do you have that too?
Yeah. We've got the ticker that goes by like these 5 counties should not leave their homes. Like we have that. And I've been in Little Rock during hurricane season. Not nice.
No, I don't know how people sleep.
my my watch went off.
I don't know.
Please.
I don't know how people sleep in those environments because it's dark outside.
Yeah.
It can be raining or hailing, and you look at the TV and suddenly a county will go red.
Mm-hmm.
And I traveled a lot, and so I had no idea which county I was in.
Yeah.
And so it's really frightening when your county goes red, and then this little voice comes in and says, go to your basement now.
Yeah. This is not a drill. Please try to survive. Well, what I like about living in New York, though, is that we're not in a natural disaster state. Not until the wildfires started happening. We're not a natural disaster state, so we don't see. We'll get tornado watches, but I, knock on wood, have never lived through a tornado in the area that I'm in. So no mudslides, no earthquakes. I think we're doing okay so
So
far.
it's kind of similar to what we get out here, which is nothing.
Yeah.
We get a
You
little
get
rain.
rain, right?
Yeah, some, but like today, it rained, I think, one day in the last 3 weeks.
Oh, well,
Um,
you're doing good. We've had a pretty wet summer, but other than that, we're doing okay. We're pretty
it
similar.
is summertime here, and don't tell anybody though, because we want you guys to stay right where you're at. We got enough.
Okay. You
So let's
got it.
You guys. So let's talk about you a bit,
Sure.
and where you came from and where you started writing and all of that, because it's very interesting to me, the thought process and the process by which you become a writer. And you've got a book that's coming out, and
Mhm.
we want to talk about that. And you've got more projects in the works, and you also do screenwriting and also producing and
Yes.
all kinds of stuff. So
Yeah, I
so
always have something going on, which is good. I mean, I have a lot of projects that I just like having my hand in. I just do. I always like to have like irons on the fire because as a creative, you don't want to get bored doing what you're supposed to love, right? So you always want to have a place to pivot to. So I'm always doing at least 4 or 5 different things just to keep my brain busy.
when do you have time to sleep?
What is the sleep you speak of? I'm not familiar with the term. I do. I sleep occasionally. But mostly like it's really like trying to fit your writing into the nooks and crannies of the day. It's like, I've got this hour and a half to write something. Let me get that down. So it's kind of by like a piecemeal kind of thing where you can only like give out a little bit of energy at a time to specific projects, but it gets the job done.
Now, I've talked to authors, including a 15-year-old young lady
Mhm.
who will sit down and write 1,000 words an hour.
Yeah.
I've talked to someone like that. I've also talked to somebody that it's like really, it's like the agony and the ecstasy. It's hard, and they have to really struggle with it. What's your process like?
Oh, I wish I had a process. I I do have a process, but I wish it was a lot more consistent than it is. My process is usually if we're talking about gearing out and writing a short story collection, which is really where that's the kind of tack that I hang my hat on is short form. When I'm sketching that out, my process is a lot of my characters and my stories come fully formed. So it's kind of building the story around a particular scene that has popped into my head. Like, I want to tell this story. This is what I need to see on the page. And then what happens to them after that, or what came before this. So I'll always outline, my acts in the story, whether it's 3 act story or a 5 act story where you're getting who this character is and why they're here, and then what the rising action is, like what's happening to them, how do they get to this climax point, which is usually the high actiony point in the middle, and then the falling action, how do they get out of it, what happens after this big climactic event, whether it be emotional or physical or actionable for them, and then what is the denouement, what is the closing arguments, so to speak, for the story. And I'll sketch that out for every story that I write. So every story has an act or a beat to it before I actually even begin writing. And sometimes if I get really into it, I will make character bios for all of the characters that are in the book. And this is things that people don't see. Nobody's going to see that. It's not even part of the end product of the book, but it definitely helps me sketch out the character's motivation if I know what my character's likes and dislikes are. What motivates them? What are their fears? What are their dreams and goals? Are they going to behave that way when somebody reacts towards them? Or are they going to say this knowing what their fears are? So that gives me a little bit more perspective on how I can realistically shape how somebody would react to something, especially in horror. When you want that visceral reaction, it's a lot like comedy. We're all going for either a laugh or a scare. So we want that reaction from someone. So how can I best do that? So that I do with every project. Sitting down and writing the project collectively is where I wish I was more consistent about. I'm just not. I mean, and I think that that is kind of the charm of the work, at least from a writer's standpoint, because the end product, you don't know how I did it. You just know now that it's produced and it's there. But for myself, I love being able to kind of sit and really be fully immersed and write for hours, and then also be really impressed with a particular paragraph in a story when I only had 15 minutes. And that's really, for me, the beauty of writing is finding that time. Writing 1,000 words an hour is just not in my wheelhouse. I'm sure I would one day. I'm sure I have in the past, but on a consistent level, no. And I really like that about my method.
It's interesting because your method translates very well into screenwriting, I would think.
Yes, 100%. And I come from the screenwriting world first, so everything has to be really visually appealing. Everything has to be then this, then this, then this, and then this happens. So it always has to feed, and then therefore. So everything has to kind of make sense. I will say I love when my stories are somewhat unresolved, where the reader can kind of glean what they want to from the ending, and I think that kind of makes it almost like a cheat code for like a choose your own adventure story at the end of the day, right? You don't really know what's happened to these the main characters or these main folk. But the reader knows, like the reader can say, this is how the story ended for me. And I think that's a really fun way to keep your reader engaged.
That's pretty cool when you think about it,
It is
how
pretty cool, Kevin.
involved you
Thank you very
get.
much.
Thanks. Well, when you think about now, I gotta ask you, because you build what I would call three-dimensional characters, is that
Yeah,
is that a
yeah.
fair then you must be a people watcher.
Oh my God, I love people watching. I really do. I really do. And I will take you back to, if we're talking about just kind of where I came from and getting there. My sister, I have two sisters. We're all 5 years apart. My oldest sister and we're just very opposite people, but my middle sister has always been my buffer sister. So she gets along with my oldest sister and she gets along with me really well. But when we were growing up, it was, you growing up in the early 80s was definitely, especially in the United States, the mall era. We were always at the mall. There was so much to do at the mall. And my sister and I would people watch. And it would be like my mother would go into like Barbara Moss or like Peebles or something like that, or Dillard's, and she didn't want us hanging around and like agonizing and being like, when are we leaving? So she would leave us on a bench outside. We would be she would grab the wallet, but we would be the purse holders. So we would have to like kind of sit out and wait. And my sister and I began just like making up, and this is like not new. Everybody's probably done this, but my sister and I used to just make up like what people were saying or what people's backgrounds were, just complete strangers, and giving them these like just incredible backstories and who they are, and this is a secret agent, and this is actually like a nun on the run, and this is like this, this, that, and the other thing. And I think that I really started to process that and utilize that within my screenwriting work, based on how fun it is to create a character that is so relatable, because you are sketching out at the end of the day a human being, a functioning human being that you're going to see on the screen one day. But also to give them, pour bits of yourself into them, like how you would also react with things, and what you would do if you were like, what would you do, Kevin, if you were a nun on the run? Like, what wouldn't you do? Like, what would you do to stay hidden? Like, what would you do to keep, the ruse up? And I think that is such a fun piece to bring to my characters in a literary space, which is why I still do the character bios. So it's like coming from just like people watching at the mall being 8 to creating like 4-page character bios and and taking up notebooks, paper that people are never going to see. It makes a quality story and it's a lot of fun.
Well, I gotta tell you, if I was a nun on the run, I would have to reassess who I actually really am, if you know what I mean.
I can't breathe. Too fun, Kevin. Too fun.
because I would not be a very good nun for a
No,
bunch of
probably
reasons. But
not. Probably not. That's okay though. I mean, we all can't accept. We can't shine all the time in everything that we're doing. So
exactly. And by the way, I think that sitting on a bench watching people go by and inventing stories about them is a
yeah,
little rarer than you might think it is.
really.
Oh yeah, I've never heard that. I've never heard that as a thing before.
Wow, really? That's. I feel like. Wow, I feel like everybody's probably done that. Oh, maybe guess. I guess not. Just a little kid being weird. Then I guess I'll deal with it. I'll take it. That's fine.
Well,
Maybe
no,
the first time been in the
what it
weird
means is
section.
you have a tremendous imagination, and
Yeah,
you're
I
able to.
I love just being outside of a world that's not mine. Like it's just and because it's I was a latchkey kid, in the late 70s, early 80s, my mother was working two jobs and going to school at night. So, being a
Wow.
little kid, you come home you got a key to the house when you're 7 or 8 and you felt like a big adult because you could get into the house by yourself. And I feel like we really don't do that in this day and age anymore. We're very helicopter with our children, and we're very just microscopic, just really just under the microscope all the time. And having that sort of freedom to like come home and like make my own food and watch what I wanted until mom came home, and play in my room and imagine things. And I didn't realize it at the time that I was writing like fan fiction of movies I liked. And that kind of just became, what I did. Like the story had to continue for me somehow because I loved the movie so much. So, and I didn't realize what I was writing until I became an adult and I was like, oh wait, people write, that's what people do. People write fan fiction like as a job. And I was like, where can I get that gig? Because I've been doing this for my whole life, which I think is so great. And I think that speaks to how much fun people have with your art and have with something that became very embryonic in your head as a character or as a story, and people just gravitated towards it and latched onto it and needed to continue the story for themselves. I love fan fiction in any genre. I just think it's such a respectable way sometimes to I read some very questionable fan fiction, but I think as a whole, it's such a hat tip to creatives that you loved their work that much. And hopefully, I said, the day I that I feel I can retire is that one of my characters will be a Funko Pop doll, and I'll be satisfied with that. And I will lather, rinse, repeat, and hang up my pen. I think that would be a really fun thing for me to do. But I don't know, what was the question? What are we talking about again?
That was so
Sorry.
long ago. I'm not sure.
It's been 84 years.
Well, I am struck by you because you've got tremendous energy.
Ah,
You've
thanks.
got what appears to be a great heart, and
Aw.
so it's like I was talking to an associate, and I was going, "Yeah, today I get to interview a horror writer," and she was like, "Oh, you're kidding! This is Positive Talk Radio. You can't do that." But you are a very positive person.
Yeah.
How in
Thank
the
you.
world did you get into? And I know that the Twilight Zone was a favorite show of
Mhm.
yours,
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
picture, if you
It's just
will.
and it's from being, home by myself. And when Cinemax and HBO and cable came around, because and I'm dating myself here, but I don't care. I'm 46 years old. I remember when MTV first came out, when the first day of MTV, I remember that. Um in the early, I think it was 81. But
Yep.
as cable started to roll out, nothing was off limits as to what time things were playing. Like we didn't have prime time then. Like we in movies or cable schedule structure, we didn't have that. We didn't have the horror things on, or like the more adult things on until after kids went to bed. That wasn't like till later in the 80s where people probably started to say to themselves, we should probably put these things on a little bit later because there's kids. But I remember vividly coming home from school and The Howling was on. And
Oh yeah.
I love a like, I love werewolf movies. I love the whole Universal monsters in any way I can get them. And I remember watching that, like sitting down on my couch about 3 p.m., coming home from school and watching that. And I loved it. And I loved being scared. And I really kind of dissected as I got older, getting into like, creative writing courses in school and in junior school or middle school, and then in high school, and just kind of seeing like what scares me, like why is this story so good? What elements did it have in it? And I didn't realize at that point that I was basically teaching myself through horror movies how to write a good story. And I see that now, and someone had mentioned that to me a couple months ago before my book had come out, and they had reviewed it, and they were just like, you must have, this is from a kid who sat there and watched scary movies, you can tell. And I was like, how can you tell? And they're just like, because your story structure is really strong for a scary movie. Like, it's very visual. It's got all the elements that I like in it. And I was like, I guess, yeah. I guess that's where it all kind of came from, was watching those scary movies. And I think for me, when you're a kid who is having to spend a lot of time alone, whether it's, your parents' job or, and my parents got divorced when I was very, very young, had a very tumultuous childhood up until that divorce. And I think the escapism was really big for me in reading horror books really early, and then cable coming in and syndication coming in and getting those horror stories and watching those horror shows like Dark Shadows and stuff. Like when I first started watching Dark Shadows, I was like, what is this? I want all of it. I need all of it. It's so campy and it's just fun and it's dark and it's crazy. And I think it was just because being alone kind of forced you to entertain yourself. And once I fixated on what was the most entertaining for me, like dark sci-fi and horror was where it's at. And I've never not liked it. And it's funny because you're not the first person that was like, you don't look like a horror person. Like,
Well,
you'd be surprised how we have permeated your communities, folks. There's a lot of us.
apparently there are, because Dark Shadows, in my day, there was a show called JP Patches, who was a clown in the city dump, and he was on in the morning and the afternoon, and then right after JP was over, Dark Shadows would come on
Yeah.
at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, right when the kids were coming home. And
Yeah.
a lot of kids got used to Dark Shadows and stuff. And by the way, speaking of werewolf movies, one of my favorite werewolf movies of all times, I can't even say it, is, did you ever see American Werewolf in London?
Yeah. Got a poster of it right over there.
I love that movie because it was tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
Because one of the, anyway, I recommend that movie highly. If you're of a certain age, you should go
Yeah.
watch that movie.
It's fun. It has a lot of levity to some serious subject matter. I mean, there's a lot going on in it. And for a young man that's going through a whole heck of a lot before he even gets to the moors, he's trying to sketch out his life, and now he's got this little affliction happening. I think that's really relatable for a lot of teens. And I think anything horror that's has transformation in it is really relatable. Vampire movies, werewolf movies, where you're turning into something that you can't control. Nothing speaks to puberty more than that.
Ain't that the truth?
So give it a look see. I'm sure you'll enjoy it.
So let's talk about, first of all, we're talking with Mo, and she has written a couple of books. You had 2 that came out this year, did you
I
not?
will have 2 next year. I've been in 2 anthologies previous, and then, oh yes, I just had the second. I'm in a second anthology this year. So Love the Sinner came out on July 5th, and I was very honored to be having a story in Encyclopocalypse of Legends and Lore, Volume 1 through Encyclopocalypse Press. That just came out on August 4th. So yeah, super fun. That's got a transformation story in it too. So yeah, it's been very, very interesting. Because when you write a story, I think, or you write a book, because you work so hard to get this like baby, you're putting your baby out there for people to tell you how ugly your baby is, and whether or not they think your baby is cute or not. And it's very, very interesting to finally have it out there and then have someone say that was really good. Because I think at least for me personally, in my head, I was like, oh wait, people are going to read it. Oh wait, people are going to like it too. I can have both. That was a really strange feeling to getting the first like really positive review where I was like, this person gets exactly what I was trying to do. And I definitely took myself out for a glass of champagne that night because I was like, deservedly so. But I think that what's really nice about that is putting the work there and getting a positive response to it. And that
Oh
really
yeah.
makes everything worth it. Like, obviously, nobody wants a bad response. I don't mean to say it's all fluff, because it's not. There's always going to be some kind of, contrarian to your work. But I think that what's been fun about this year is being in the anthologies really gave me such confidence to be saying to myself, I could write an entire book of these. And I
Sure.
did. And I was like, I'm going to write a whole book of these. And I did. And when I submitted it, I was like, what have I done? And then, it came back a really positive response about, and Bridget's Gate has been just great. And to know that I presented them with 8 stories and they got halfway through the first one and offered me a contract. That's
Wow.
really nice to hear.
That's
That's
also unusual, by the
Yeah,
way.
super complimentary. And it's just been from that point, and I know not every interaction is going to be that good or that complimentary. But it's very motivating. It's very validating to know that your work resonates with people, and you did get the reaction that you wanted out of folks when you started pen to paper, and that's what I really want to continue doing. Obviously, screenwriting will always be a first love of mine, but I think the literary space has really embraced me, not only as a community, but also just really enjoying doing this type of work, and doing it well, and just knowing that there's other worlds in my head that I can build out and be successful in. So that's been really, really fun this year.
Oh, we're going to talk about that. We need to take
Yay.
a little bit of a break, but
Yeah.
we're talking with Moshaty, who's got a couple of books out. And I'm going to ask her in the second half of the show, are you more in the Stephen King, Alfred Hitchcock mode, or are you more in the wee slasher mode? And
I have to pick? Kevin, I thought we
well,
were friends.
you can have it all, but
Yeah, that's
and I
right.
also want to talk about your work as a cognitive behavioral therapist and some of the things that you've seen in your life
Yeah,
and
sure.
stuff like that. So we're going to take a break. You're listening to Positive Talk Radio on KKNW 1150 AM, and we'll be right back. Hey, PTR loyal listener. First, thanks for being in my dream. And second, I have a new concept in business to share with you. It's called socialpreneurship. So, what's that? Well, it's the idea that any company designates all profits, beyond expenses, to be awarded to a local or international charity or project which is working to achieve good in the world. KM Media is such a company. We believe that it's important for us to give back whenever possible and to make great things happen. So I hope you'll join us in creating this new business model that will positively impact all of us. In the next few weeks, we will lay out the plan and begin our fundraising efforts. So stay tuned for more details right here on Positive Talk Radio.
When you want to say more than words communicate, you can with flowers. Your custom boutique floral studio in Bothell, Washington is anaturaldesign.com, connecting you to nature through the language of flowers. Where your people are is where our flowers are beautiful. Your success is our goal. anaturaldesign.com at your fingertips today.
Hey, thanks for listening to Positive Talk Radio. Did you know that we're also a media production company? Well, surprise, we are. We can create all kinds of audio, video products to fill any need. Please visit kmmedia.pro/our-store for a complete list of products and services. In addition, do you need a great voice to add to your own website or any other project? I know that we can add depth and quality to your work. I've been told more times than I can count by many professionals in the business that my voice adds to the quality of the presentation. So, let me create something for you. Please contact me at kevin@kmmedia.pro and let's create something great. And welcome back to Positive Talk Radio. My name is Kevin McDonald. I get to be your host today, and I hope everybody is doing well on this Monday morning. Oh boy, Monday afternoon, and it's Monday night where Mo is. She is in New York, and so she's a ways away. Mo Moshaty is our guest, and she is a writer. She's a screenwriter. She's a producer. She likes to talk to people. She's a speaker. She does all of that. Um,
Do.
Mo, I got to ask you, what's your favorite thing to do? Is it standing up in front of an audience? What is it?
Oh, wow. My favorite thing to do is, I love writing. I love creating stories. My favorite thing to do is really lecturing. I really, really love speaking to people about horror cinema, and kind of marrying that with mental health, which is my behavioral sciences part of my background in academia. Um, and when I get to marry both, I mean, I think that's a great way to see my kind of eyes bug out and my kind of get really excited about what I'm talking about, and really animated as if I'm not animated enough. But that's really my big pleasure is to lecture. I would love to do that for my life. Any college that's listening that would like to hire me to babble on, and pay me a livable wage, that would be fantastic.
Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be nice? And
The dream.
I got to ask you, how do you marry the two? How
Well,
do you bring horror into a lecture?
Well, I lecture on horror cinema, so I usually come at it from more less of a critical and more of an analytical lens. My focus is really trauma in horror cinema. So when you watch a horror movie, obviously, something traumatic is happening to the main characters, or even like the side characters, or it's the aftermath or the prelude to what is going to be a traumatic event for this character. And I think because we have all experienced some sort of trauma in our lives, whether it's we're grieving the loss of someone that was very close to us, or we've had a violent event, or a tragic accident, or a near-death experience, or something along those lines, or God forbid, a violation of some point. We've all had an experience where something has been very visceral within us, and we feel just a little bit broken and need to heal a little bit. And I think that that's what's so interesting about talking about mental health and horror, even just trauma and horror, is that once you've gone through that, you can easily spot that in a film, or that reaction to what you might have gone through in a film, or it might be just a little bit different of an engagement from there. But I think what's important to talk about trauma within horror cinema is that horror cinema really teaches us kind of how to behave. It's really interesting to see when you've left a horror movie, those of you that go out and watch horror films, or if you watch them at home, you're turning on all the lights afterwards, right? You've done it, right? You get out of a movie at the theater, you get into your car, you're checking that back seat, right? You're looking behind you, right? Like, it teaches us how to be more aware and be more high alert in how to behave and be more responsive, and have better emotional reactivity. There is a group in Austria called the Recreational Fear Lab that studies this. For that is their whole crux of their study, is how horror gives you reactivity, like what happens to your body when you're watching a horror movie, and how helpful that is for you. And I think it's one of the only genres that really does that. I mean, you're not learning anything, how to escape your house, or how to hide from a killer from, watching, Bridges of Madison County. Like, you're not learning any like survival skills from watching like a dramedy or like a baseball movie or something like that. And why I like melding the two is because it gives us more permission to say, this happened to me and it was hurtful and I'm healing from it and it's okay. But also giving horror more respect in this sect of saying, we are showing, and they may be grandiose scenarios at first, but we're showing real human beings under pressure, under the worst conditions, and this is how the body reacts. And when we were going through the pandemic, horror viewership spiked 60% because everybody
Yes.
felt whatever you're going through is much worse than what I'm going through right now.
Oh,
And
goodness.
it was healing to people. And I absolutely love that.
Have you ever been in a popcorn throwing movie?
Yes.
The first one that comes to mind for me was I'm a little older than you,
Just a touch.
just a touch, and we went and saw Jaws in the drive-in theater. Now, okay, a drive-in theater
I know what a
is a
drive-in is.
yeah, but trust me, there are people under 40 that have no earthly idea. The
Oh,
drive-in theater, you used to go in your car and you would drive into the theater, into this big place that had the screen, and then you took this speaker and you put it on your window, and then you could go get snacks and stuff, and then you sat in your car and you watched the movie.
yeah.
I remember a particular scene in Jaws where there's a sunken boat and this head comes out of a hole in the boat, and you could hear people in their cars throwing popcorn and screaming.
Shrieking.
And,
Yep. As it should
and,
be.
and, and I'm sure Steven Spielberg was off someplace going, yes, yes, I got the reaction
Yeah.
I was looking
That's
for.
what they want. Yeah, and that's I think is a great thing. And it's okay to be scared. It's good to get your heart rate up. I love that.
But please tell me that in your books, the woman doesn't always fall down, does she?
No, I'm at least in my work, I'm not a big fan of the ankle twist crawling slowly away from the killer. I've never been a fan of that in film either, but I mean it had its place. It was the damsel in distress piece that a lot of the early 80s slashers had, and it was that build up is like, she's not going to make it, but let's watch how slowly she ain't going to make it. And I think that was a draw. That was a cool piece in cinema when we were starting to get into like Friday the 13th and Michael Myers and later on into, Nightmare on Elm Street with Freddy Krueger. We were getting to see these people have to agonize about how slow their death was going to be. And that is exciting for the viewer, because we know as the viewer in those instances that one of you ain't making it out. But we're almost ahead of the story, right? We're ahead of the victim. We know what's going to happen. So for us, it's an exciting piece. So I mean, I get it. It had its place. And it's kind of there. Sometimes you'll see it in modern movies where it won't necessarily be a fall, but someone will go further into a dark room and you're just like, oh, you sweet summer child. What are you doing?
Have you seen that commercial? I can't remember who it's
The one with the
with.
chainsaws. Let's hide behind the
Let's
chainsaw.
hide behind the chainsaw. Oh, there's a good idea.
Let's hide in the car that won't start. Like, yep.
Are you crazy? Oh man.
Oh, I love it. But I mean, it had its place, but you will not find it in my work. No.
Well, good. And I'm glad because you are also working with people in trauma.
Yes.
And you're helping. You know, I've done a lot of these shows. I've done 2,000 shows,
God bless
2,000
you.
in my career, and 2,000 interviews, and I've talked to people a lot. Everybody has trauma.
Mhm.
It seems like there isn't anybody. I have never found anybody that can say, "Yep, my life was perfect and roses and
Mhm.
puppy dog tails," and because everybody has a degree. Now the degrees vary widely, but
Sure.
everybody has a degree of trauma.
Mhm.
And so it's really helpful when you, as a cognitive behavioral therapist, can help people work through their trauma so that they
Mhm.
can live a better life, and live life to their fullest. And I know that's in your heart, and that's what you do. And then you marry all of these things. It's kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I try to, especially like my work is my schooling is through cognitive behavioral therapy, and just from the behavioral science sect is emotional reactivity. So that is my piece where my anchor and my concentration, and then further into that, specifically women in PTSD. Because for the longest time, especially when PTSD was kind of surfacing as um, something in the emotional and psychological aspect of medicine, it was seen as what they called the soldier's disease. So it was seen in men that were coming back from World War II, Desert
Vietnam.
Storm, things of that nature, Vietnam. And it was just seen as having them had that traumatic experience of war, and the heinous acts that they needed to do in order to survive or complete missions or what have you. And that was seen as, just an absolute collapse of a sense of self, in addition to like what their duty was. And it was really seen as that just it only happens to these people that do this. And what we were seeing is that women had been experiencing it as well. And I don't want to say longer than, but had been ignored longer than in the medical field, because women were getting institutionalized for hysteria, which we now know are some shinings of PTSD from women having multiple miscarriages because due to maybe religious obligations where it was upon the woman to build the family, and their body just wasn't doing it physically. They weren't able to, and so there have been women who have died from having multiple births and miscarriages and things of that nature, and that's a very real thing that's happened. But my focus was on women's PTSD because I felt like they were very ignored for very long to the healing process. They weren't really given the outlet to find psychologists. The crazy lady, the hysterical woman had always been a trope, whether it be literature or film or just, women in general. I mean, hysterectomies are for women, and hysterectomy, the hyster, is part of hysterical. And there's a reason why that is a thing. That's kind of how they felt about women back then when they were naming things. But it was for me, it was like just kind of shining a light on making sure that everybody had the appropriate accessibility to mental health. So I really wanted to do my due diligence is to give them what they needed. People in my sector, my area, give them that respect and that honor. But what I really started to see in that is that I started to come from a very gendered space about it, and I started to get very offended by people not immediately recognizing women also having PTSD. And then I started my further work in behavioral science and really just concentrating on trauma as a whole. And as you said just a few moments ago, there's not a human being in this world who hasn't experienced some degree of trauma. So yes, my concentration is definitely still on women in trauma and PTSD, but also just as a spherical, it's definitely a human experience, and that has to be acknowledged.
It was as little as 40 or 50 years ago when they considered a soldier to be quote unquote shell shocked
Mm-hmm.
or something like that. And they didn't even have a name
Nope.
to put on it all the way post war or Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of guys came back. Half or 56,000 people died there, but over 500,000 people served over there, and all of them saw horrific things.
Mm-hmm.
And they came back, and it took them years, and in some cases never. And which
Yeah.
is also why the suicide rate amongst the
100%.
military or former military is very high.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm applaud your work because we're just now learning that PTSD can be caused by a dysfunctional sexual relationship. It can be caused by physical abuse and mental
Yes.
abuse. There's all kinds of, and to some degree or another, I think that we can all point to an instance in our life when we felt like that we were having that,
Yeah.
PTSD.
We
And
all have an origin piece. Yeah. 100%.
and the sad thing is that there are women walking around. I had interviewed one just the other day that she had a horrible experience 20 years ago, and she buried it in her mind
Mm-hmm.
because she couldn't bear to live with it on a day-to-day basis. But it came back to haunt her, and
Mm-hmm.
it took her a long time with a lot of work from very loving people to be able to get her to get through it, to understand what it was that she went through, and then to be able to get past it.
Yeah.
And so this is a big deal. This is a big thing that's going that
Yeah. It's a
and
it's a
new.
it's a very strange piece because you also have something called CPTSD, which is complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which is from ongoing incidents. Usually post-traumatic stress disorder is from one origin incident, whether it be a robbery, a violation of self, abuse, something that was very chaotic or one singular event. Where you have something from like CPTSD, which is continuous events. You are living within this trauma constantly, and it's very linear. You need to survive through it. And that might be somebody who is, living with an abusive partner, or a child living with an abusive parent. They have to figure out how to survive and emotionally react within this situation that is not going away. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of adults that are experiencing that, whether it be, their partner, their family that they're supposed to depend on. Sometimes it happens in the workplace when we have, in America, we have this very I think it's a very generational thing where we just don't have it anymore, where you were at a job for 30, 40 years and you got the pension and you left. We still have that mindset where it's like we have to stay in order to survive. And here in the States, our retirement age keeps going up and up and up and up and up and up. And we're going to be 80 by the time we can collect on anything.
It's soon to be 70 years old.
Yeah,
And in
it's
my world,
crazy.
in 70 years old is way too late to work. Because your body between six this is something I know something about. Uh, because between 50 and 60 you start losing muscle mass,
Yeah.
and between 60 and 70 you start to decline. Between 70 and 80 the decline is more pronounced,
Hmm.
and if you can make it to 80 and stuff like that. So it's really is and I wanted to bring this up because it there are people running around who are alive today that they didn't do this. My sister was a bank teller
Hmm.
in a bank. Guy walks in with a gun. He pulls a robbery off, doesn't get outside the door. The police come in, shoot him dead in the bank. My relative witnessed the entire thing. Nobody came to her and said, "Why don't you take the day off? Why don't she finished working the day of that?" And nobody was
Insane.
there saying, "We need to get you some help and some counseling so that you can get through this." So she
Hmm.
ended up wearing it, but it affected her forever,
Yeah. And
and that's how it used to be.
yeah, I mean, I feel like as a child, and like, again, dating myself here, in third grade, we all sat around in our classrooms in 1986 and watched the Challenger take off.
Oh my.
And a bunch of kids in school saw the Challenger explode in real time. And I don't remember there ever being any type of counseling, any type of, do kids have any questions? This was very tragic. All it did was play on the news over and over and over for weeks. And I don't remember there being anything, you know, for us to even talk about at school, no type of like, you know, help of any kind. And I think that for our parents, that might have been for them having to talk to your kids about death for the first time.
Yeah.
And that's like nobody taught us how to do any of this. And I think that hopefully we are on a path of kind of understanding um that we're not in the trauma Olympics. Just because my trauma is this and your trauma is that doesn't mean I'm beating you in the trauma Olympics. Everybody is very singular in how they experience it and what they've experienced it. And I think that there is right now, I think there's two buckets. There's a lot more respect for how complex mental and emotional reactivity is and how we're handling it. Obviously, we're seeing, unfortunately, new and different cognitive declines and different degrees. We're seeing there being more research done with like dementia, and then like pre-dementia, and then like different kinds of decline triggered within PTSD. And we're seeing that, but we're also kind of seeing the disrespect a little bit in it, because, if you get on like social media, things like, Instagram, TikTok, things like that, where they're showing like everybody has this, or if you do this, you might have this type of mental disorder, or if you do these 5 things, that like you can walk and chew gum at the same time, then you should probably go see your doctor. And it's being, that type of advice is being like kind of handed out like candy, and it's not getting the attention that it really deserves for it. So I think if we're just more aware, and we're just a little bit more just cognizant of how we feel as an individual, and getting the help that we need, and having that help be accessible to all neighborhoods, affluent and non-affluent neighborhoods, marginalized neighborhoods. I think that if we open up to being aware that not everybody looks the same as a client of, a psychologist. We're seeing children, we're seeing adults. We need, therapy for marginalized folks that, are not having the same experiences, LGBTQIA plus. We're not seeing the accessibility for those folks either. And we need to open up and be aware of that everyone is going to have a different experience, because there's so many walks of life. And the more accessibility that we give that, and all of these groups that are kind of yearning for it and not seeing it, we're going to have a more healthier mental health world to live in, and hopefully a little bit more understanding for what each other is going through.
A little understanding would go a long way, but we
Just a
also need
touch.
and it would go a long way, but we also need to, you're right, to have enough we're finding out that mental health is, I think, is going to be one of the major issues going forward, because we're discovering the hidden nuances of how difficult it can be for, and then you start talking about postpartum depression, you start
Mhm.
talking about bipolar, and all of these things that are, they're coming, and people on the spectrum and
Yes.
stuff, and we all need to understand that we are all one, and that we need to help each other. And I really wish that we as a people would say, enough. We want to make sure every kid in this country gets fed. We want to make sure everybody has a shot at a good education. We want to make sure that all these things are happening,
Mhm.
rather than to say, well, this is a capitalist country, and if you can't make it on your own, you ain't going to
Yeah.
make, you know?
You know,
So
there's a lot
anyway,
of in my days we didn't. And it's like, well, what rock have you been hiding under for the last 40 years? Like, it's not your day anymore. Like,
ex-
it's for me, it was like, in my day, we were just the talkative kid in class. It's like, yeah, I used to get that on every report card. Monique talks too much in class. You know what? Monique has adult ADHD. That's what was happening to her. She didn't get the focus that she needed as a child about, attention deficit and hyperactivity. And here we are, years later. But
and
hopefully,
that wasn't even when I was in grade school. That wasn't even a thing. They had no idea
nope,
that didn't even come up. By the way, we've been talking with Mo. Your last name?
Moshaty.
I knew that.
Not
I knew that.
machete, but
Moshaty,
Moshaty.
and she's got 2 books that have come out this summer, and the encyclo I
Yeah,
can't
I'll
even
say it
say
for you.
that word. This is too long for me.
So the newest one that has just come out on August 4th is called The Encyclopocalypse of Legends and Lore Volume 1 from Encyclopocalypse Publications. And then on July 5th, my first novella, my short story collection, Love the Sinner, 8 Disquieting Stories Bound by Sin, was released through Bridget's Gate Press.
And I wanna thank you for being here. You are a delightful human being. Do you know that?
Oh, so are you, Kev. I have so much fun when we chat. I love this. This has been great.
And we've got, like, about, 35, 40 seconds, so no pressure, but tell our audience anything you'd like them to know.
Sure. So if you are so inclined, you can also find me on social media. I'm usually 95% of my time is spent on Twitter. You can find me at Moshaty there. You can find me at moshaty.com. My horror collective, Nick's Horror Collective, you can find information about us on Nick's NYX horror.com, and about our 13 minutes of horror challenge you can find on 13minutesofhorror.com. We'll be putting new information about our newest film challenge coming in 2024, hopefully streaming on Shudder again as well, there in the next coming months.
And by the way, if you missed any of that, you can. This episode will be on. Well, it is now on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Which actually, Twitter's not even Twitter anymore. Did you know that?
It's X, or everybody's still calling it Twitter. So you just go to your heart's delight, Kevin. You just keep calling it Twitter. It's fine.
X.com.
No one is calling it X.
I think that's a terrible name.
It is. You can't even trademark it. It's just
no. So anyway, Moshaty has been our guest, and I want to thank you so much for being here. It's such a pleasure to have you. And
likewise,
I look forward to having you back.
Yeah, we will do this again. Thanks so much for having me.
And by the way, take care of each other, because each other's all we've got. We'll see you